All right, welcome to TPB Live. It is Friday, late afternoon here on the East Coast, where I am. We're jumping back into TPB Live and hopefully do more of these where we talk about Bitcoin news, politics, global news, and everything in between. With this group, with special guests every couple of weeks. So thank you all for joining us. I'll kick it around and we'll start with brief intros. Daniel, welcome.
I mean, how do I introduce myself? Trey, I've been working with you for a better part of a year. I came on board as an advisor to Progressive Bitcoiner to help revitalize the brand and have been running the visual and some of the creative stuff that we've been putting out. It's been really fun to work with you throughout this whole process. And as of just a month ago, I joined PubKey, which is where I'm recording from today as head of marketing. So a lot of stuff happening this year. Bitcoin is beginning to take off again, and we're sort of at that moment where I think people are really beginning to pay attention, and this is the right time to be working in this industry. So yeah, just really happy to be here today, and let's go.
Sweet. Evan, welcome. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm Evan. I build, manage the website, host the website, and I guess, been with the Progressive Bitcoiner since before there was a Progressive Bitcoiner. Been doing the website as long as we've had a website.
Cool. Damien, over to you. As I'm checking if we're live, which we are.
Yeah.
All right.
I edit this podcast. I've edited a bunch of podcasts. And chances are, if you listen to podcasts in the Bitcoin space, you've listened to stuff I've edited. I work for a bunch of Bitcoin companies, What Bitcoin Did, a bunch of things, Compass, I'm currently doing the mining pod with Will Foxley. That's going out over CoinDesk now. So anyway, that's what I do. I do audio visual stuff.
Sweet. Thanks you all for being here. We are going to kick it off with an article and a news story that's been around for actually quite a bit and keeps kind of coming and finding itself in different forms and fashions with Virunga, Bitcoin mining, Africa. One of the best stories. Damien, I think you said it, you're like, what is not to love about this story in terms of Bitcoin adoption, in terms of what we're trying to talk about here at the Progressive Bitcoiner, all of that good stuff. And, we'll kick it around. Damien, with you. This was one article you had thrown our way in terms of something to talk about and focus on this week. What stands out to you? What is it about this story, about this, that I think is really important to just talk about, especially with normal people about why Bitcoin?
Okay.
Well, this is one reason.
So I've read a bunch of stories about this. I really like this story because it has a ton of things to care about and a ton of things that I care about. And it's all enabled by Bitcoin. So the Virunga National Park is on the border of the DRC, Uganda, and Rwanda. It is a World Heritage Site. It's like an amazing place. It has some high level or high elevation cloud forest type stuff as well. That becomes important because it's also home to 1/3 of the world's mountain gorilla population. So it's an amazing place. It's kind of nationally protected and all of this kind of stuff. It's also a really horrible place to live. So there is lots of military conflict between factions in the region, like militias showing up and murdering people kind of stuff. So in 2014, the director of the Virunga National Park was driving back to his office in the park when he came under fire from one of these militia groups. And in his car, he returned fire and ran off the road and ran into the jungle and huddled there for a while until he was able to get back out to the road and get to the hospital. He broke 5 ribs and a bunch of his internal organs were punctured because he got hit twice. And I tell this story not because it is not because he's important, although he is in the story, but because it's not special there. So in Virunga over the last 20 years, over 200 rangers, Virunga Park National Rangers, have died being killed by poachers. So that's what's going on in Virunga. They got a bunch of money to build a dam or to build an electro power plant. And the reason I don't say a dam is because it's a river run design, which means it doesn't. They didn't flood like a valley or anything. It's just kind of in line with the river. It doesn't store any power or anything in the form of like a big water basin. It's just kind of the river runs, the plant runs.
Yeah. And Damien, I'm going to let Margot in really quick, just so you know. But you can
okay.
continue. Let me throw her in.
Okay.
Hi, Margot.
Hi, sorry.
No, you're fine. We're talking about Virunga National Park and Bitcoin mining.
Okay, cool.
Damien, go ahead.
So they got like philanthropic dollars to put this this power plant in. It's not a large power plant. It does about 13 megawatts, and it's in a region where it can reach about 30,000 people. There's about 80,000 people that live within the confines of the park. So it's kind of a smaller scale situation. That brings us to 2018 when there is a bunch of killings by poachers of rangers. So they had to shut the park down. It just like wasn't safe for people to come into the park. That is followed by 2019 when an Ebola outbreak happens. I didn't even hear about this, but apparently they had an Ebola outbreak, and so they couldn't open the park. And then comes 2020 and COVID, and they had to shut the park down. They had no tourism dollars coming in, and they're basically like, what are we going to do? We can't pay anybody. We can't maintain any of the stuff that we have available. And so they had this idea. They have this power plant that actually wasn't very hooked up to a lot of the houses around the power plant. They kind of built the power plant and then were like, we're going to electrify everything. And they realized how hard it was to like actually get houses connected to this thing through, wires and, just infrastructure stuff. So they thought, hey, we could mine Bitcoin with this power plant, and they contacted a guy, and that's what they did. They set up a power plant at this facility, or a Bitcoin mine at this facility, and they use probably like 2/3 of the power that's coming off of this thing, because it's not hooked up to anything. Like it is waste power. So. And all of it's all built in modular. It's built modularly, so they could remove Bitcoin mining if they wanted to. So what they do with this, with the Bitcoin that they mine, is they sell it. They sell all of it. It goes to pay salaries for people. It goes to pay infrastructure costs and all of this kind of stuff. And to give you some sense of like how much they're making, or like making is a weird term, like. They're using this thing to do operations, but the DRC gives Virunga about $100,000 a year in support. The Virunga power plant mines about $100,000 a month of Bitcoin. So they are getting a large amount of money off of this power plant to like do stuff with, and they sell it all and they use it all. And so you have this thing you have this Bitcoin mine in the middle of nowhere, mining Bitcoin and like helping all kinds of people and doing all kinds of things that I think people care about. Like it's getting more people. They're actually able to use this money to build out the wires from the power plant to the houses. So they're getting more people hooked up to the electrical grid. What that does is it reduces deforestation, because one of the main things that comes out of Virunga National Park is charcoal. They cut down. Local people cut down the trees, turn it into charcoal, and sell it, even though they're not supposed to be doing that. But they're starving, so like they're going to do what they're going to have to do. So so you get this power plant that's getting built out that reduces deforestation. This mine provides salaries to all kinds of people, including the rangers. And as we talked about, the rangers get killed quite often. Like the rangers, it is they are some seriously brave people. Like it is not.
Yeah.
It's they get like when I searched like how many people how many rangers have been killed in Virunga, it had to give me a list. Like there wasn't a story. There was a list
Wow.
of times, and this as recent as like 9 months ago. Um, so so it goes to pay the salaries of the people there. These people protect the mountain gorillas. The mountain gorillas would not be alive if they would be extinct if the rangers were not there. Like that's the level of kind of poaching pressure that the gorillas are under. Like they catch top dollar for dead gorillas. So like the gorillas would not exist if the poachers or if the rangers weren't there. One interesting thing I found about this story is that the miners that they're using in this facility, they're using S9 miners, which were made like 7 years ago or something. Like these are really toughly built miners that don't hash. They're not the most efficient miners around, but they're built like tanks, and they're not profitable if you want to stick them in Texas or something. They're just not profitable there. But they are profitable when you stick it in the middle of nowhere and you run it off of zero cost power.
Yeah.
Because all of your money is already sunk into this into the power plant. So you have reduction of e-waste too, and as I talked about, the reduces deforestation, and you have all of this running off of wasted energy. All of this runs off of waste, and if that it's just like this for me, it's like a perfect encapsulation of all the things that that Bitcoin can do when you use it in novel ways. I forgot one last thing. It enables other businesses. So what they're doing with the excess heat that comes off of these miners, so you got these miners and it's blowing crazy amounts of heat, right? They're using the heat to dry cocoa beans and dry fruit to make fruit leathers. So I guess they kind of like they make fruit. Dried fruit to sell at the local market and whatever. There's also a soap factory that's around there as well. So they're using excess heat that's coming off of the miners. So you have these kind of more businesses enabled with this thing. I think it's just a beautiful story.
Yeah, that's awesome. Margot, you're tired of talking about mining yet? I'm just kidding. Margot, our mining expert and beyond, has joined us. I mean, off of that story, and we can kind of ping pong, I think, between these two, because one is the story of great hope and what Bitcoin mining does, and another that we'll touch on. What is the exact title that Bitcoin Policy Institute is? The latest United Nations study on Bitcoin mining is fundamentally flawed, by Margot Paez, who is on the call with us. So in maybe the next 15 minutes or so, we can ping around through this. Margot, I mean, we touched on you were working on this in our recent pod conversation. That if folks haven't listened to that, go check it out. But in this article, it's finally out. I mean, what to you are some of the major FUD points that you're trying to point out from this UN report, and just a little background on how this article came to be?
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess I'll start with the background. And can you hear me okay? Because I'm in the research lab literally right
You
now.
sound good.
So try not to talk too loud, disturbing people. This is my cubicle. But yeah, so this study came out in October, and it was published in an AGU journal called Earth's Future. And it was published by some authors who were part of the United Nations Water Resources Institute. And, it was a look at Bitcoin's energy use, and it had a lot of policy recommendations. At the end, it was a commentary, so that means that it may or may not have been peer reviewed. The journals kind of take liberty with that depending on how technical they think the study is. So we don't really know. I mean, it's a fairly technical enough study that we would at least assume that it had gone through some kind of peer review, but it may not be as rigorous as a typical article. So yeah, so the study came out, and it was like, made some waves because it was doing something a little bit different. It was not just looking at Bitcoin's energy use, but it was taking the energy use and then breaking it down between nations, and then doing an environmental footprint based off of that energy use. And I went through the paper thinking, okay, this is going to be like a 1-page response, and no big deal. I've done this before. And then the more I read through it, the more I realized, oh my gosh, this is awful. What were these authors thinking? This doesn't make any sense. It looks like they're conflating these years, and they're making arguments about the present. And so that just set me down this really, really horrible rabbit hole where I was there for like a month, just like replicating their study and going through and analyzing the Cambridge data to really see if what they were doing made sense. And in the end, it didn't really make sense. And what I got out of it was, some sleepless nights and 10,000 words. So, yeah. But go ahead, Trey.
No. It's just like, where do you begin with things like this, right? I think that's the tough part. I mean, we'll share two other things that come from this. It's like, in some moments I have thoughts of like, oh, the FUD is dying down, and then things just drop out of nowhere. Some folks might have more hindsight, like maybe Margot, you or Troy or Daniel Batten kind of put out the bat signals when one of you hears something maybe coming down the pike. But it's so, like, sometimes I'm like, okay, not that the FUD is over, but then you get reports like this from the United Nations and people that are outside. I keep having to remind myself of this. People outside of the Bitcoin circles, like you see the UN, you see a Greenpeace, you see others, and you're like, okay, yeah, those are good organizations. Those are good journalists doing X, Y, Z. And I keep having to remind myself of that, because being in this circle, one of the first flags when you see of like a UN climate report in terms of Bitcoin mining, or a Greenpeace climate report in terms of Bitcoin, a lot of us might say, oh yeah, no, of course not. Of course they don't know what they're talking about or are doing. Most people still just don't think that way. And I keep reminding myself of that. So it's got to be at some level too, Margot, just really, really frustrating to see organizations that, we all on this call might believe in a lot of what they're trying to do, or a lot of the intention. I think I also talked to like progressives about that. It's like, yeah, I can actually agree with like a lot of what these folks are actually talking about, and have made contact with many people from Greenpeace or many people from the UN on different initiatives. And I'm like, right there with you. And then Bitcoin, it's like something dramatically changes. Like it completely pivots. It's just beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we're all generally philosophically aligned with the mission of a lot of these organizations, but for some reason, Bitcoin is just, it's just really bad. So it really brings out the worst, and you get these papers. But I'm hoping that we'll see this change, because there's been enough peer reviews now, like systematic studies that have reviewed a lot of these energy models and have clearly shown that they're really inadequate, and that there's serious problems with the methodology and the way that the researchers are operating.
Yeah.
Mainly, they're not really engaging with the literature. They're they're operating in silos, and therefore you're not actually advancing research. So I'm hoping that this will make room for better research, and hopefully we'll see less of this. But I think also, I mean, Alex DeVries's work, I think, is politically motivated, and he publishes something once every year. So you'll expect one this year, right? Yeah. So yeah, he's got his own agenda, and I think it's also, he's got an ego. It gets him on the front page, because I saw him on his, I think his Twitter profile, where there's a photo of him and it's like something about him going after AI now.
Oh,
Which he's using his same approach with AI,
sweet.
which is also really bad modeling.
Go for it, man.
So go have at it. Waste people's time there. Meanwhile, the real researchers like Jonathan Kumi and Eric Massenet, Arman Shahabi, like all of these people that are at Lawrence Livermore and Berkeley at the lab there, they're doing the real energy study on AI. So, that's the study I'm interested in.
Yeah. Does anyone know his Twitter? Why am I? Wait.
Digiconomist? The
The Digiconomist one. Yeah. No, because I saw someone else posted something. Not his. It was about that. It wasn't from his account though. But let me. Damien, go ahead. Your thoughts on that? Maybe you could touch on the report if you want. But I saw your your reaction there on AI.
Yeah. So I read some of the report. I didn't get all the way through it yet. It's just so disappointing when you read these things.
Wait. Also, can I add? I'm so sorry. The Progressive Bitcoiner account, which Mark had, and then I kind of took over. I guess July of 23, the actual Twitter account. I guess I've never actually clicked on his profile. We're blocked, so I can't. I can't actually see what's on it. That's amazing. I mean, are you blocked, Margot?
I think I'm blocked.
What did Mark do? I'm gonna have to follow up with him and be like, "Did you go after?" I've never interacted with anyone from that camp. I try to stay not super blockable. Anyway, that's really funny because I was gonna pull it up. What Mark's talking about?
No, I'm not blocked. I'm not blocked.
Interesting.
Amazingly, I think he just ignores me.
Okay.
Every now and then I say something to him in his comments, but I guess I have not offended him enough yet.
Keep working at it. Damien, sorry, what were you saying?
I looked at Digiconomist. If you look at some, I remember going back and looking at one of the studies that he did, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, studies in quote marks. And the people that were on the study, it was not just him, it was a couple other people. They run a proof of stake consulting firm for blockchain stuff. It's just what is going on here? And because and the journalists get a hold of these things that look like studies and they look official because they're on these terribly built, terrible looking websites that are this is what academia looks like. And it's just completely not that. One of the things that I thought when I was reading the study is the per transaction environmental cost an analysis of things, and it's so dumb on its face. In that a transaction can be a 1 to 100 people transaction, or 100 people to 100 people, and that's all within one transaction. So you can fit literally thousands of people or thousands of wallets in a transaction. But I was thinking, this is like science. This is like doing science in service of a soundbite. That's what they're going for, is a soundbite. And Bitcoin just does not fall into a model that you can do that very well with, and it's just disappointing. I'm looking forward to the day where it's just sad, or that if a journalist or somebody is oh, Bitcoin mining energy, we've heard this 1,000 times. Say something new. So I have a pretty big emotional reaction to these studies because they're just so bad.
Also, Damien, this is the transaction you had sent. Isn't it so beautiful though?
Yeah.
How do you judge that? It is a work of art. I want this.
Is that a coin join?
Yeah, that's a coin join transaction.
I want it framed on my wall, back here, right there.
That's
it's
so
so
cool.
beautiful. That's the whole thing. Because the Twitter, it's only a snapshot, but when you actually click on and expand, it is gorgeous.
Just a total side note on the kind of KYCing of all transactions and everything. That transaction sits on the blockchain. It is so obvious that is a coin join.
Yeah, right. I know.
No other transaction looks like that.
No.
So it's no wonder that they can pick out what's been coin joined and what hasn't, because it's just so crazily obvious.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is so much.
To jump in quick, real quick. First of all, apparently I'm also blocked by Digiconomist. No idea why or when
Because your
that
name's
happened.
Evan.
But I was searching for him. Like, why can't I find him? Oh, but to tie sort of our first two stories together, I think we're hitting the wall of frustration with the same FUD coming over and over again. I think what we need to do is somehow figure out a way, or eventually it's going to bubble up within media that stories like what's happening in Africa and frankly everywhere else, that the park in the Congo are happening all over the place, and that's what the media will hopefully eventually latch on to. Is the narrative needs to change about it. Yes, it uses a lot of electricity. Yeah, that's the downside. However, it uses it in entirely new ways. It can use it in an entirely new way, and the only byproduct is heat, which can be used in an assortment of means. But my hope is media can pick up on that and start following those trails instead of just the annual updated Digiconomist. Here's why it's bad. Here's how many swimming pools of water it's chugging every day, or whatever.
Evan, I'm really interested to know if you believe that the trend in journalism is to become less lazy or more lazy over time, because I have my thoughts on that. And after seeing what it has transpired over the last several years, I don't see them getting any better. And I don't
No,
know what it's going to take to get the right journalists to cover the story in a way that actually makes sense and follows the actual science, which they've told us follow the science for many years. But when it comes to Bitcoin, they don't seem interested in any of that. So I don't know where to even begin. We already have all the information, and we're doing more research. We're gathering all this information and presenting it in a way that we understand how Bitcoin can operate without causing environmental damage, and yet they always seem to go to the same story over and over again. And it even gets to a point where the US government, when they want to write regulations, when they want to start looking into the energy use of mining companies, use the Cambridge study, and they use these sources that we have questions about, that we think are not legitimately researched. So if they're using that to make policy, who can talk to them? Who is actually giving them an alternative to that existing narrative?
Dennis Porter. I mean, there needs to be
We're
more
all
than one.
doomed if that's the case.
But no, but ultimately, I agree with something that Peter McCormack said on a recent pod of his, which is that what Bitcoin is completely lacking is any kind of HR or marketing
Oh, was that
department.
Carla's episode? Yeah.
It was that who I couldn't remember who he said it
Yeah.
with.
It's the lightning one. That's right.
But it's just non-existent. There's no one out there that it knows how to speak that language and market things in a way that are appealing to people. Too many Bitcoiners take the approach of, well, it's here, it exists, therefore it's inevitable. But I've learned through the many, many, many failed technologies I've been an early adapter of over the decades, that that's not always the case. There have been lots of superior techs that have died
I don't even know if
because
it's
of.
the case that like there is no marketing agency for Bitcoin. I don't know if there can be one, because but there's so many different places you can go to get information, and no one is going to give anyone else that exclusive authority, because Bitcoin doesn't offer that to anyone. If it's an open system that everyone can use, it's really just going to be the loudest voices that have the most followers or the most political clout that rise to the top. And I don't see a way that an entity or a company or a foundation, we've tried things like the Bitcoin Foundation before, and that didn't work out. So I don't know where you even go with, like, you're trying to put centralization on top of something decentralized. How does that even work?
Well, I mean, I do know of a nonprofit that is trying to do this, and they've been working really hard to raise money. Their goal was to raise $5 million because that was how much Chris Larson gave to Greenpeace. And they have been doing a lot of work in terms of surveying people and their opinions on Bitcoin. And I hope that I hope I'm not getting in trouble, but it's called the Nakamoto Project. So, if you have money, please give them your money, because they're really trying to do this. And from everything that I've heard, I think that they have the right message and the right idea, and if they can pull it off, I think it would be a really successful campaign. But it does take work, and I think it is hard when this is a very decentralized movement, and you're not a centralized corporation where you know the CEO just says, yeah, let's throw 5 million into our ad campaign, right? We just don't have that ability because we don't have a CEO. Bitcoin doesn't have a CEO. And really, where's all the money in the industry? I mean, it's going to the Bitcoin miners and maybe like the exchanges, and you have to fundraise from a very small pool, and it's a very competitive pool. So we have a really very interesting system, ecosystem financially for supporting these type of activities. But yeah, if you know any rich people, please send it to the Nakamoto Project, because they're trying to do exactly what you guys are describing.
Margot, what do you think? Should we just go ahead and make Michael Saylor the CEO of Bitcoin?
Oh God, no, no CEOs, please.
I have never. I feel like the name triggers something in me. Like I feel like I've heard that said before, the Nakamoto Project, but I had not heard of this. And then
It's new to me as well.
there's your two people right there.
And I follow Troy, and I haven't heard about this myself either. So
Yeah. Why isn't Troy promoting this?
yeah, exactly.
I don't know. It's been a secret project, so
It's a public
I
website.
hope that I didn't just
No,
ruin it,
you
but
definitely haven't.
he's been working
I searched it. Came up as like the first, second
he's
result.
been he's been working hard in the background trying to raise money for this to happen. So yeah, it's a really commendable thing that they're trying to do, and it's a really solid group of people working on it.
Well, also, what's tough about Bitcoin is Bitcoin isn't one thing. It's not like one company or even a collective of companies with a similar vision. Like Bitcoin is this open, permissionless protocol, and there are millions and billions of companies that will be Bitcoin companies or Bitcoin initiatives or Bitcoin causes or whatever using Bitcoin. So it's like I think in that Peter episode 2 with Carla, I think Carla, I forget who was saying like it's like just engineering why it's just it's one of the hardest things to work on and be involved with is Bitcoin. Just anything, figuring out what it is, what it's not, how do you engineer it, how do you talk about it, how do you market it? It's there. I mean, there's more complicated projects today. But that's really cool. The Nakamoto Project. I'm gonna keep an eye on that. Cool.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think and just to be clear, I did not mean a centralized single marketing department. Bitcoin needs like dozens all over the world. Right now, we have been operating with the loudest voice in the room is the one that gets all the attention, but we all know who that tends to be. Not referencing anyone in particular, but we know who the loudest voices are, and that's not always the best voices for the world to be picking up on in any emerging technology.
Yeah, for sure. Evan, since you're last to talk, shall we touch on it for a second? The Putin interview. Here.
So I didn't watch the whole thing.
If anyone did, I hope
I didn't have time today.
Oh my God.
I mean, I was waffling on maybe like setting it at 2x and seeing if I could make it through. But from the clips I've seen and the quotes I've read and all of that, it was Tucker Carlson sitting across from Putin, who just got to ramble for 2 hours, while Tucker asked like 6 questions during that time. And I don't know. People are irate at Tucker. I obviously have my own feelings about him, but I feel like most other journalists would have also taken this opportunity. I can't besmirch him for, taking the opportunity to get a huge interview, but I don't know. It didn't. I don't think it changes anything. Frankly, I think the people that were pro Putin and pro Tucker are going to continue to be exactly as pro Putin as they previously were, and I think those of us that hate him and view him as a vicious dictator are going to continue to look at him that way. So I don't know. I guess
Evan,
it was a
did you
non-factor
just
that increased Tucker's profile.
did you just call Tucker a journalist?
He said any other
By
journalist.
current journalistic standards, yes.
I just wanted to make sure I
He's-
heard that correctly.
He's a journalist. I mean,
As Peter McCormack was like, he's a chat show
yeah.
host. Shout out Peter, man.
He's
you
a
gotta
chat
stay off
show
Twitter,
host,
Peter.
yeah.
Those used to be journalists too.
Right. Can I just say one thing and then
He's-
kick it over to Margot? The funniest thing to me about that interview was the very beginning when he was like, Vladimir Putin was like, I'm just gonna take 30 seconds a minute to talk about, just give me 30 seconds. And it was like 10 minutes of rambling about, and then Tucker was like, what period are we in? He's like 13th century. How did we get from like 1860 to like the 1200s? Like, when did this happen? So just like, he just view him as a drunk uncle at a party, just like rambling about the good old days. So once that kicked it off, my frame for the conversation was not, oh, this is dangerous, this and that. I'm like, oh, this is into the mind of a dictator. Just like, and I posted this on Nostr earlier. I was like, oh, it's when you watch a documentary about like the mind of a criminal, or those people that have intimate conversations with people who are really fixated on something, or a dictator, or not well, or this mass murderer, or whatever. That's what this was. So view it through that documentary light, in my mind. But just give me 30 seconds. 10 minutes later, we're talking about like, oh God. Anyway, sorry, Margot.
No, it's fine. I just, yeah, when I heard him start talking about like the 10th century and 13th century, and I was also very confused. Like, what is going on here? It just started really abruptly, and I realized, I guess he was trying to give like this whole history of the, what Ukraine meant in the context of this long historical period of, the Russian history going way back centuries. And what I took away from that, and I also only watched about half of it because I had so many things going on, but one, that Tucker Carlson is the worst person for this job. And it's hilarious that it's him who ended up interviewing Vladimir Putin. The guy, I'm sorry, he's not very bright. He's kind of stupid. And he could not really come up with good questions, really hard-hitting questions. It's like, it was just kind of sad. Like, it was so obvious how charismatic Vladimir Putin is, and the power that he has, and why he has that power, and how he can really control a situation like that. I mean, he really dominated the discussion, I would say, and made Tucker Carlson look amateurish. And I really don't get a lot. I didn't get a lot out of anything he was really saying, because I don't take Western politicians seriously, and I don't believe them at face value. So I'm not going to do that either with Vladimir Putin. I know everything that he says has a political motivation, and I know that he doesn't believe in democracy, and that there's brutal crackdowns in Russia. I mean, so Edward Snowden is allowed to live in Russia. Well, Obama commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence, and he still did horrible things. So that doesn't make Vladimir Putin a good person. So I really don't. I'm not a shill for state leaders. I'm not a shill for dictators, and I really don't. Other than I find it fascinating as a case study, and as like a profile and lead, and the type of leaders that we have. I think beyond that, I really didn't get anything out of it that was meaningful. I guess I'll have to watch The Gray Zone so that they can tell me what I should think about that interview, since they seem to really think that they're really fighting Nazis. I mean, that was the other thing. Like, he was like, yeah, we're fighting, there's Nazis, and yeah, it was 80 years ago, or how many years ago, but they still have the ideology there. And I don't know, I like, on the one hand, I can say like, okay, maybe I believe that. Maybe you guys are still fighting that war, but I also just see that's very politically motivated, so that Russia and Putin can annex the Ukraine or whatever part of the country for their own political ends, right? He has a particular goal, and that's what he's trying to do. And it's just doesn't. I don't feel any sympathy for him. It's always nice to hear people critical of the U.S. It's always nice to get that outsider perspective. But I also know who Vladimir Putin is and what he's done. So I just, I'm not going to really, I'm not going to suddenly be like, yeah, Putin. Like, what?
I think there's a reason why Tucker got the interview, and it's not that he asked for it. He was handpicked for this, and you could see it. I mean, I haven't watched it because I won't watch it. I have no interest in actually sitting through it, but I have been consuming it through memes. And my favorite one so far was Tucker asking him, Mr. Putin, why did you invade Ukraine? And Putin responds with, 4 billion years ago, the Earth was in its cooling phase. So he knows he can say anything, and he knows that Tucker's audience will absorb it and lap it up. And this is not going to change hearts and minds around the world. It's really just him using this platform as a way to say the same things he always says. Putin is a former KGB agent. FSB is the new incarnation of the KGB, and he's said himself, once an agent, always an agent. So I don't see how this is going to do anything other than help him spread his propaganda globally.
Yeah, and this is the meme right here. Yeah, I've seen a lot of good memes, and several people have said they're going to consume it through the memes. I want to touch too just for a second, because if we're not going to, then who's going to? I don't think it's any surprise. And yeah, it's Bitcoin Twitter and some Bitcoiners, but what are any folks' thoughts or reactions on why many Bitcoiners, different accounts on Twitter, this and that, when people type in Bitcoin, they might see some of these accounts and then also see some of these accounts shilling, what don't they want you to see? This conversation is important, posting clips of this, or, some even going as far as being outright just supportive of Russia and this kind of talk, and, putting down the West or putting down, the US, and being in this binary where it's okay, it has to be US bad and Russia good, or Russia bad, US good, all of these things. I've just seen, I knew some of that would happen, but seeing so much of it, some of it is I don't know, I guess, what are you guys' thoughts? Is that a product of Bitcoin Twitter? Is that emblematic of a deeper issue in people that are attracted to cult-like behavior, which some can attribute and connect to Bitcoin in a religious manner, and thus, connect to stuff like this in a religious and cult-like way? It's just absolutely disgusting. And some people were mentioning, Peter McCormack just saying very normal things, in my opinion, about this and kind of questioning this, and people just completely slamming him. And many of them will slam Peter no matter what, or slam whoever, because that's just what they go online to do. But I think I was a bit more appalled than I thought about that this week. Evan, being around, well, many of you have been around in space for quite a while, but Evan, kind of talking about the the different waves of Bitcoin, where does this one fit in?
What do we call this? The carnivore era. I don't know. I think it's kind of how the internet works. Bitcoin already attracts people that have a certain type of mindset. And I think when you get to be completely anonymous, you get to go over the top with whatever your views might be. And then you have the echo chamber of Twitter or whatever other social media, and it just gets worse. And I think that's what we've seen escalate. I feel like certainly years ago there wasn't this much political. I guess I want to say political discussion, but I don't know that is the right way to say it. The talk used to just be a lot more about Bitcoin. You didn't necessarily know, oh, that's a right-wing libertarian, that's a left-wing progressive Bitcoiner. everyone was just kind of talking about the tech and the number go up more than anything else. And I think when large enough groups, when more and more people came on board, and as the usership and growth of Bitcoin continues to happen, you see larger and larger groups, and that just gets more vocal. It's easier to get in that echo chamber. It's easier to say your opinion, say it louder, and say it more radically than you were previously.
A thing that I think concerns me a lot is when you hear, and it really is kind of a paradoxical thing. People will say Bitcoin is a form of democracy, or they'll say that Bitcoin is a guard against authoritarians, and then they'll immediately, in the same breath, support an authoritarian leader. So it's really like there's a cognitive dissonance that I think is happening, and you can sort of understand it because I think people generally are averse to the state, but it seems like they're more averse to their own state. But when it comes to another state, they're like, oh yeah, Putin's great. He's running Russia just like he should. He's a strongman, and I'm not sure why the strongman image appeals so much to people in Bitcoin, which is a system that doesn't rely on rulers. We always talk about rules without rulers, but yet when there's this authoritarian trend that we see happening in a country that's posing a direct threat to us, to our allies, to our neighbors, like I think people just immediately overlook that because they want to sound critical to the current administration. And watch, if we do end up with a second Trump administration, there'll be less criticism because, of course, it's the people that support authoritarianism who want that to happen. So I find that to be a really troubling trend, and it's been something that's been happening over the past few years. And I've seen people in Bitcoin who were extraordinarily reasonable leave the space entirely because of that discourse, because they just couldn't stand reading it anymore. And I'm worried that that is going to drive more people away from the things that we want to promote on the more progressive side of Bitcoin.
I think it definitely will. Yeah, sorry, continue.
No, I just want to jump in here. One of the things I like to say to people that I meet who want to talk about Canadian truckers is what do they think about what do they think about the Cop City protesters? And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Well, the Cop City protesters have been charged with money laundering and racketeering for taking donations for doing what they're doing, and nobody talks about that." And like it was hard to, when the Canadian trucker thing was happening, it was hard to have a conversation with somebody who was more on the left, because it was just like, well, we hate what they're doing. And I'm just like, I'm not talking about what they're doing or why they're doing it. I'm talking about these are people that are they are airing grievances and asking for redress of their grievances from the government. These are citizens. They get to do this. Like that's what we all signed up for. They get to do this. And it is just kind of fundamentally wrong to kind of freeze their bank accounts and stuff just because they are doing something that a bunch of us don't like. And so, like, I just think, I don't know, I just kind of brought that up as like, there's a whole spectrum of things that go on in the world that don't get kind of echo chambered on Twitter, that are the same kinds of things, but just causes that those particular people don't care about, or they see as like stupid or threatening the state or something. I love that there are Cop City protesters, but I don't think most Bitcoiners do, or at least most Bitcoiners on Twitter do. So just want to throw that out there.
Evan, were you going to say something before Damien jumped in? Was that?
Ooh.
I can't remember.
No, I'm good. Or I lost it. Either way.
Yeah, I mean, I worry about that a lot. I mean, it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast in the first place. Talking with Mark, talking with so many of you, being really, really worried about that. Evan, remember when we talked about, I think maybe you had, I don't know who coined it. I think it was you. We talked about it quite a bit, that, Bitcoin is that layer zero effect, like people in terms of Bitcoin. Like, I forget the way we said it or the quote, but I have a really, not outsized, but a really large view of, in my mind, I was very concerned and very, very much care about the cultural layer of Bitcoin. And early on, I would talk to different people about this, and they're like, nah, Bitcoin's inevitable, this and that. And I'm like, I don't know. And I still go back and forth with that, even with guests on our podcast. It comes up almost every episode. It's like, is Bitcoin inevitable? Is it's not? And I'm like, well, I'm deeply concerned about this cultural issue. And Evan, you've talked about it many times, like with any tech, there's so many tech that have come and go and died, like, and Bitcoin being a great tech and Bitcoin being all of these things. I think I personally, at the end of the day, might land on it's inevitable, but the timeline is what I'm a bit more concerned with. And the opportunities for everyone is what I'm here for, more concerned with. So if we're not focusing on, or even if we're ignoring that cultural layer, I think that's a huge miss with Bitcoin. It's just like, it's been deeply concerning to me in the first place. It was hard enough for me to like get into Bitcoin. And then, hearing some of these arguments, I'm like, okay, I'll kind of stick through it, if you will. I know a lot of people like that, like a ton, that Bitcoiners just aren't in those circles for the most part. I think it was like Bitcoin layer 0. Yeah. It was just such a great way to put it.
Yeah, I definitely can't take credit for coining layer 0 as people.
Yeah. Layer 0 people.
That probably happened
Yeah.
years and years ago. It's referencing Soylent Green,
Yeah.
where there's a scene in the movie where he's yelling, Soylent Green is people! It's people! And I took that scene and made a meme out of it with the layers. I think that's what
Yes.
you're
Yes.
referencing. But no, it's certainly a concept in Bitcoin that goes well, well before, we well before me, but we always talk about how, there's layer 2 tech, layer 3 tech, whatever they may be. Ultimately, the most important layer is the people using it. Will Bitcoin exist without anyone using it? I don't know. Yes, technically, if it's still running, but on a philosophical level, does it? Is it useful if no one's using it? And that's I guess where layer 0 is the
Yeah.
people using
Yeah,
it.
for sure. I'm looking at the clock. We have like 5 minutes here. I'm probably not going to go into the other story. I'm going to,
We never even
I
got
know,
to
I'm going to post it in
ETFs.
the show notes for Mark's article.
We almost went the whole show
I
without
know.
mentioning ETFs. Why'd you
Well,
have to
I'll
do that?
touch on it, and then let's go around. I'm going to ask a very vague question and like lightning round of Bitcoin ETF, especially this week. What's interesting is the ETFs launched at this point, like 3 weeks ago, a month ago, I don't even know. And basically, it's kind of come back for full circle on the price. We've had a pretty nice USD price pump the last few days. Some people might have gotten into the ETFs. It crashed. And I was joking with, forgetting which group chat, which Telegram chat, but saying with Evan, I was just like, is Satoshi like actually playing with buttons in the back? Because we've got like the price, and then, the price crashes after the ETFs. It crashes, it goes down a little bit after that. And then we've got a 420 halving. I'm like, you can't make this shit up. Like, this is so funny. This is just so brilliant. Like, is Satoshi actually pulling strings? I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, but the price has come back full circle. I'm sure some people might have sold the ETF. They probably bought it and was like, oh, this is stupid. But then it's ramping back up again. And I'm like, this is happening a bit quicker than I thought, just in terms of this. So Bitcoin ETF, good or bad for Bitcoin? The Daniel, I'll start with you.
Well, to answer your other point, Bitcoin is the original meme coin. And I think the last cycle, like we pretty much tapped 69,000. So yeah, I think 420 is where we're going to go, both for the halving and for the all-time high. But that's a joke. But it could happen. So yeah, what's happening with ETFs? I mean, I've been following it. So we're like almost exactly 1 month out from the approval. In fact, we're like 1 month to the day, pretty much, of when the fake approval from the SEC happened, when they accidentally sent out a tweet that
Gosh, that was a month ago already.
Was either not planned or that was a month ago. And then the next day, of course, the ETFs were all approved, went live for trading almost immediately. And then, what did we see? We saw a lot of negative price action, which I think spooked a lot of people. And so it was that instant like, oh, it must be a sell the news event. And then looking at what happened over the next several weeks, there was just a ton of activity, both in terms of the GBTC ETF being essentially dumped, and all of those coins moving into the other funds, going into Coinbase, going into, which is custodying almost all of them except for Fidelity. And then you're seeing now BlackRock and Fidelity emerging as the clear winners. But they are buying more Bitcoin, both OTC and from exchanges, than is being produced per day from miners. So where do we end up at the halving? We're going to obviously see what everyone is sort of, who's paying attention, is predicting to be a massive supply shock. And no one's really paying attention to that because most ETF buyers, if you talk about retail, and even if you talk about people who would otherwise be sophisticated Wall Street traders, don't really understand the dynamics of Bitcoin. They don't understand the mechanisms of the halving, of mining, of the supply cap. They're looking at a price on a screen. They're looking at a chart, and mostly a linear chart, not a logarithmic chart. So they don't really have that perspective that if you've been in Bitcoin for long enough, you will see, or if you've done the 1,000 hours of study, which you should do, you'll understand those things. And it really is kind of, there's lazy journalism we talked about earlier. There's also lazy trading and lazy finance. They just want to buy something that they think will go up. And if it doesn't respond the way they want it to, like, oh, I bought Bitcoin, why isn't it mooning? Well, because they don't have that perspective and that long-term time horizon. If you're buying Bitcoin today, you can't expect, fireworks. You have to be able to withstand several years of activity before you can really begin to appreciate how the market works. And if you're just in it for a quick buck, most people are going to get bored or scared and sell before they even experience that. So what will ETFs do for Bitcoin? I mean, it's obviously going to allow people to be able to invest in it in ways they haven't before. And I don't see that as a bad thing, but it's not going to promote things like self-custody, and it's not going to promote education of what the asset is. And that's really, I think, the real sort of tragedy of this is it's just sort of financializing an asset that doesn't need to exist in that world. So I hope it inspires people to want to take self-custody and want to do more research and maybe get them to eventually buy Bitcoin and hold it themselves. But I don't have a lot of faith in that happening in the short term because people really do tend to want to rely on a third party and a custodian to handle those sorts of details.
Margot, I won't hold you to this 30-second lightning round question. I know it's more nuanced than this, but is the Bitcoin ETF good or bad for Bitcoin? What would be your 30-second response?
Oh, I don't want to answer this. I mean, we have them now. They're there, and I mean, it's just going to see how it plays out. At this point, I really wasn't a fan of that, because I'm not really a believer in the institutions and bringing in institutional money. That's the kind of adoption that doesn't really appeal to me. And I think that a lot of us are operating on different concepts of what mass adoption is. And I think if the only thing you care about is seeing number go up, then yeah, you're gonna want to see BlackRock and Larry Fink pumping Bitcoin, right? But for myself, that's just not really what I think Bitcoin is about. And so I'm really hoping that it doesn't really do anything and that it doesn't really change the price. It doesn't pump the price very high. It doesn't really drop the price. And I just hope that the stuff that I think really matters, which is what's happening in the global south and using Bitcoin as a lifeboat, is still able to continue, and that's really what I hope to see dominate going forward. So I guess I think I don't know. I mean, like, the ETF stuff is really just for the West. I think it's a thing for people in the West who don't really need Bitcoin. People in the West don't really need Bitcoin. They have the dollar, they have the euro. These are still pretty solid currencies despite inflation that we're seeing. They're still really solid currencies. Dollar is still the world reserve currency. So, this is just another. I think it's just another toy. But Bitcoin is still just another toy from the Western's perspective. And so long as that doesn't really affect the broader goals in the global south around Bitcoin, then I'm not really going to think about it too much.
Yeah. Bitcoin, the Bitcoin ETFs are for those who don't need Bitcoin. That's interesting. I like that. Evan, over to you. 30 seconds. Bitcoin ETF, good or bad for Bitcoin?
Yes.
Great. Damien?
No, now I'm going to reference my favorite flow chart that just says, "Is this good for Bitcoin?" And then there's the arrow pointing down to the
Oh,
word
yeah.
yes. No, I frankly agree with everything Margot had to say. I think, yeah, ultimately to the Western world, to the Northern Hemisphere, I guess, it's a toy. ETFs are just a fun way to bundle this new investment that they want to play with into a traditional system. I don't think it does anything to hurt Bitcoin, and I think it might help um, bring about Bitcoin adoption, or at least maybe educate a few bankers, which would probably be good in the long run. And by that meager standard, yes, it's good for Bitcoin.
Cool.
Can I just respond to something, because Margot did say that people in the West don't need Bitcoin, and I would just counter that by saying, after sort of going through some difficult economic times myself, I'm very glad I have Bitcoin. And when people are facing things like the perspective of job loss through AI, or rising costs of housing, rising costs of food, people who are graduating from college with high student loans and don't really have a lot of career prospects, if you do put some of your savings into Bitcoin, over time it will help you, and I think it will improve your standard of living. And so I do think that we can't just say no one in the West needs Bitcoin, even though we obviously understand that there's a lot more potential in the shorter term for people who live in more impoverished societies to be able to benefit sooner. But I do think that there is a place for it, and that people who do have underperforming investments, or who are facing challenges economically and can't really make ends meet, do have some hope in what Bitcoin can offer them.
Yeah, I hear that. Damien, Bitcoin ETF, good or bad for Bitcoin?
I think it's probably in the short term. I think it will be good for price. I think in the short term, it's a good thing. In the long term, if Bitcoin does what we think it might be able to do, I don't think it's going to matter. In the long run, this is like them taking like something that's really cool and innovative and wrapping it into something that they're familiar with and they're comfortable with, and like we're going to bring it into we're going to back our Chuck E. Cheese token by Bitcoin with Bitcoin, and we're going to trade our Chuck E. Cheese tokens, and it's going to be amazing, and ultimately they're just Chuck E. Cheese tokens. So if and these are not definite outcomes in my mind. Like Bitcoin is not inevitable, but if it does do what we think it might do, I think it might just be just a bump in the road of everything. But I want to put out speaking of like something that I like to do is I like to track the price of Bitcoin in houses. So I started tracking. I have a thread where I track the price of Bitcoin in houses, and I talk to house owners, like they're shitcoiners, because like if you bought it, it's kind of like if you bought a house or you bought a Bitcoin, which one is worth more? So like the price of houses have been coming way down. So now in October it was like 12 Bitcoin for a median house in the United States, and now it's 8 Bitcoin. So I just want to plug my metric.
You're going to give Plan B a run for his money with the stock to flow, but house to Bitcoin flow. That's funny.
There you go.
All right, guys, it's Friday. Happy weekend coming up, and thank you all for jumping on and doing this. Really appreciate it. Much love, everyone. And we'll do this again. And thanks for those few that stuck with us and those that are watching after the fact in a much more polished, nicer looking recording version. But thank you all so much.